Welcome learners. Today we will be discussing about under this course India and the world politics is bilateral relation between India and Central Asia, that is under the unit 4 India and its neighbor. So one of the important component of India and its neighbor, that is called India and Central Asia, though it is called extended neighbors because we do not share the boundary with the Central Asian countries. But despite they are very close historically, culturally and physically as well. So any changes which take place in any part of the Central Asian countries, it has a direct implications for India in terms of economics, in terms of politics and in terms of strategy. So that is why this area is very important for us. Now, the term you might have heard from the newspaper while reading the book, Theory of Great Game, that is related to Central Asia. What is the theory of the Great Game? Means the two imperialist power, they clash to grab the larger chunk of the Central Asia, and through the Central Asia they wanted to move in South Asia. And that is how in the 20th century the process, the conflict started in the late 19th century, but in 20th century 1905 an agreement was being signed between Russia, the Tsarist Russia, which we knew it as a erstwhile Soviet Union, and the British Empire. And British also wanted to grab the larger areas, and they had a fear that if Russians are coming closer to Central Asia, it would be detrimental for its regime which was running in South Asia, including India, at the time India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. So it wanted to deter the Russian imperialist progress, and that is how Wakhan corridor, you might have heard about it in the recent India-China standoff. That corridor was in the news, and there is a strategic relevance for Wakhan corridor. So it was a buffer line. A line was created that north of the Wakhan corridor is the areas of Soviet Union, erstwhile Soviet Union, and south of the Wakhan corridor is a regime of Britain. So that is how this area had become very important for both the countries, and that is how it is known as a Great Game theory. Great Game is British imperialist power and Russian power. Now, you might have heard quite often the new Great Game in Central Asia. So what is the new Great Game? I mean, since it is implanted and the reference point has been taken from the earlier Great Game between Russia and Britain, but the current Great Game is completely different from its earlier form. In earlier form, only the two imperialist power were engaged and involved in taking decision in the area. But the current Great Game, as we know, we need to know a little about the geography and history of the Central Asia. Central Asia became independent unit as a different countries, combination of 5 countries of the erstwhile Soviet Union. These are Kazakhstan, which is the largest, then Uzbekistan, the second largest, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan. These are the 5 Central Asian countries. Earlier, they were the part of erstwhile Soviet Union. Since the Soviet Union, certain areas broke up, dismantled, disengaged, and they became independent, each country became an sovereign nation state and accorded by the United Nations. And that is how the combination of 5 Central Asian countries, including with Afghanistan, is known as Central Asia. There is another name which is learned in the different universities, Inner Asia also. But when we call it Inner Asia, it has terminology has a altogether different meaning. Then Tibet and Inner Mongolia also comes under the rubric of Inner Asia. But apart from the terminology of Inner Asia and Central Asia, when we study under the Central Asia, these are the 5 important republics which are now independent unit, and including Afghanistan is a study under the Central Asia. So in the current Great Game, there is not merely the role of Soviet Union and other European power, but many new powers have become engaged. Like Pakistan is one important component in Central Asia. China has become much larger in the Central Asia, especially after it initiated a Silk Route, new Silk Route in 2013, which is known as in the Chinese term OBR. You might have heard about it. So this is how the new players have also came in. Russia was already there. There is no doubt about it. It is still very powerful in most of the Central Asian states. There are American interest, European Union interest. Iran has started playing role. Turkey has become an important component. India has a strong stakehold in Central Asia. So combining the external powers, which are more than a dozen countries, are involved in the restructuring of claiming a stakehold in Central Asia, that also makes the new Great Game very complex. The second part of the Great Game, within Central Asia, all 5 Central Asian countries have their unique compositions of social and economic structure. And they also started playing very important role. Means none of the Central Asian countries are completely dominated by one ethnic groups. There are mosaic of the ethnic groups which intermingle from Kyrgyz to Kazakh to Uzbek to other Arab inhabitants. And in most of the countries, there are Russian, 10 to 25% Russians are still there in most of the countries of Central Asia. So this is how the interest, geographical locations, ethnic compositions, economic priority, that also make it a more of a very complex futures of the Central Asia. And that is why it provides a larger space for external powers to maneuver into the area. And that is why the new Great Game theory, which is extension of the earlier Great Game theory, but very different from its earlier form. Now, the second important thing after knowing the Great Game theory, how Central Asia is connected to India and why is it important for India, that is also very important for all of us to know. Central Asia, as I said, does not share the boundary with India. That is true. But if you go historically, what do we see when India was united? Means the province was not divided in 1947. That was a whole chunk of it was in one. The Wakhan corridor, where it has merely a few kilometers away from the Ladakh area, where the tri-junction of China, Central Asia and Afghanistan mingles together. And India had also boundary at the time when India was united. Now that part has gone to Pakistan. Pak-occupied Kashmir. So through that route, that was easier for us to move into the Central Asia, the 5 Central Asian republics. Then what do we have? India was the first country, even before independence of 5 Central Asian states, we had a state council there. We did not have the full-fledged embassies because it was not an independent country, but when it was a part of the Russian Empire, Russian regime, India had a very good terms with Soviet Union, erstwhile Soviet Union, and that is why we had an office in a couple of Central Asian countries. Consulate general were sitting there and trying to identify. You might have heard about it, Tashkent Agreement. Tashkent is where? It is a part of the Central Asia. Uzbekistan, capital of Uzbekistan, where the treaty between India and Pakistan was bargained by Soviet Union, and Lal Bahadur Shastri and the Pakistani counterpart signed the agreement before the Russian leader, and that is how you might have also heard about it, that the Prime Minister of, at the time, Prime Minister of India, Lal Bahadur Shastri, had a heart attack and he passed away in Tashkent. So these were very intrinsically connected with India. From 1991, when all these 5 countries became independent, that became more obvious and important for India to expand its economic, social and political structure there. Because most of the countries were, despite being 99% Muslim, but had a secular identity under the Soviet regime, and they wanted to maintain their secular identity even after their as an independent unit, and that matched with the interest of India. That is how politically India tried to weave through most of the Central Asian countries, but somehow, somewhere, the economic connection between the two countries were very slow, and that led to certain shortcomings, and that provided a larger space for China to move in. And what do we see after almost 40 years, from 91 to till today, almost 30 years, what do we see? China has expanded in most of the Central Asian countries with a vigor, with a certain new initiative, and utilizing the best possible benefits from Central Asia. India also tried to make up the loss by an initiative which started in 2012, India Central Asia Connect. In 2015, when the current Prime Minister, he was the first Prime Minister who visited almost 5 Asian countries in one go. That was not done earlier. So the speed has tried to pick up, but still we are very far away from our counterpart, especially against China. And that is why there is a huge gap in terms of economic presence in Central Asian states. Now, while discussing about India-Central Asia relations, what are the major components which we need to know? The most important component of India-Central Asia relations is to identify the energy crisis. Energy is one of the components which India, as the 3rd largest consumer of energy in the world, need to import. We might have, India has been trying through a gas pipeline. You might have heard about it, read about it, TAPI, Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan and India. Means the gas pipeline will move from Central Asian states where it has a huge amount of gas and other resources which could be very useful. But since Pakistan is a blockade, Pakistan is against India, so TAPI pipeline has not been materialized and it is still lurking. means nothing has been done much about it. So this is one of the crises. Whereas what China has done, China has completely moved in to almost all the Central Asian countries. It has established a bilateral ties, it has established a multilateral ties, and through that, humongous gas pipelines have been woven from each of the Central Asian countries wherever there is a huge amount of minerals and gas are available, and that has been supplied through the pipeline to the different parts of China, which connects the Central Asia. So this is one important issue before India, that we need to have energy. We had a very historical cultural ties with Central Asia. China did not have this cultural ties with the Central Asian state. If you try to go back from 300 BC till 1500 AD, what do we see? There is a strong cultural connection between the two countries. Travelers from Central Asia, they came to India. The travelers from India, they went to Central Asia. One of the Indian travelers in the 20th century, who was Rahul Sanskritayan, who has written a book, who moved each and every corner of Central Asia and written a book on Ganga to Volga, which is a travelogue, and in which he tries to analyze through the stories of mythological story about the cultural connectivity between the two countries, how the ancestors of India, they had economic ties, they had cultural ties, they had almost a person-to-person relationship with most of the Central Asian countries. But despite having such a in-depth, dented, cemented ties between India and Central Asia, that was not resulted after the disintegration from Soviet Union to mend and to create the same amount of terms and conditions with the Central Asian state. What are the second important factor between India and Central Asia? The involvement of the external power. The involvement of the external powers currently are not conducive to the Indian interest, which are the power which does not allow India to play a larger role. The most important is China. China has, after the disintegration, it has a very strong ties with Soviet Union, Russia, and all we know that the amount of gas and amount of energies which are located in the Caspian Sea, where the two Central Asian states shares the larger chunk of the Caspian Sea. Russia has an important share, and that is how China has moved into through the Central Asia to reach out to the Caspian Sea, and through Caspian Sea it moved into the European countries. So this is one major challenge which prohibits India to garner larger support system or base in Central Asia. The second challenge is China-Pakistan nexus. Pakistan has a regional flavor, starting from Afghanistan, and its baseline is Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is nearby. Pakistan shares the boundary with Afghanistan. As I mentioned, Pakhtunkhwa, the areas of Pakistan which shares the boundary with Afghanistan. There are many same ethnic groups which are there in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So Pakistan has in-depth policy, and which explains that if India moves into the Afghanistan, it will not be suitable for Pakistani interests, and that is why it tried to, through the help of China, to curtail the Indian interference in Afghanistan. We'll talk little detail the peace process which is going on in Afghanistan, where it will take, and how India will how India is watching this peace process, which is in pipeline, which is moving, what will be its implications. But let's move to the third point. What is the third issue for India? Third is rise of fundamentalism, especially Islamic fundamentalism in most of the Central Asian state. The historical base of Central Asia is very secular. Even most of the Sufi sons who came to India in 14th and 15th centuries, they came from Afghanistan. The conquerors also came from Central Asia. But the version of Islam which were there in Central Asian states, very soft. They were very conducive to adopting the ideas of other religions. But over a period of time, at least after the disintegration of Soviet Union and involvement of Pakistan and Turkey in recent times, has generated a hardcore extremist form of Islamism there, which could be termed as Islamic fundamentalism. And when we talk about Islamic fundamentalism, it is outfit of different terror groups are involved. There are factual. It is not merely on air, but there are many facts. There are many events which have taken place. If you try to identify from 2015 to 2019, more than 100 cases of extremist activities taking place in and out of Central Asia, large scale migration from Central Asian states to European countries who were being recruited as an agent of ISIS. There are also reports that many of the recruitee of ISIS, when they went to Syria, they went to Iraq, they went to Iran to fight for Islam, and they came back to Central Asia. And after coming back to Central Asia, there was no space because Central Asia wanted to maintain its secular identity. Then they were pushed back to Pakistan. They are living in Pakistan. Through the Pakistan, they are coming to the Indian territory to create a problem. And that is how the symptom of Islamic fundamentalism, whether they are part of the Haqqani groups or they are part of Taliban or they are part of other terror outfits, they are not merely a threat to the secular identity of Central Asian states or Afghanistan, but they are also threat to the South Asia as well, and India is one of them, primarily targeted by these groups. So this is the third major challenge. The fourth challenge for India and Central Asia connection is widespread poverty and internal migrations. As we all know that politically the system in most of the Central Asian states are not very cohesive, but economically it is a catastrophic. They are very poor countries. Couple of Central Asian countries are rich in terms of minerals. Kazakhstan is very rich in terms of uranium and other minerals. Tajikistan has a huge amount of water. There are two major rivers which flow, Abu Darya and Sabu Darya. There are two rivers which the civilization of Central Asia has emerged from there. But economically they are very poor because the reasons are many. The reasons industrialization did not take place during the British Empire. Most of the workers, they migrated to Soviet Union for higher educations, and the structural changes within Central Asia did not take place. So this is one major challenges. Now fourth challenge is Afghanistan factor. Afghanistan is a lingering problem in Central Asia. Lingering, when I talk about the lingering, means it connects with Central Asia. Three of the Central Asian states has a boundary sharing with Afghanistan, and Afghanistan shares the boundary with Pakistan. So there is a direct linkages from Pakistan to Central Asian states. Then, whereas on the north part, what we see, the two largest countries of Central Asia, they share the boundary with Russia. And there are three Central Asian states which shares the boundary with China. So these are the external powers. Currently, they are not very good in terms with India. Soviet Union, erstwhile Soviet Union, and currently Russia has a very good terms with India. But despite being that, it is inclined towards China because of many reasons. Pakistan is completely unfriendly and hostile to Indian approach. Turkey from the other side, which also tries to intervene. Iran is also sometimes tries to play a bargaining role. These are the external powers which give a little unfriendly atmosphere, create an unfriendly atmosphere surrounding the Central Asian states, which is a major challenge. So now what to do, how to make or break this blockade which has been created by, all we know that we had a very strong historical ties, we had a very strong cultural ties, we had an opportunity to move much faster because by 1991 India had a consulate general offices in Central Asian states. But from 1991 till recently, we did not have much economic integrations, economic ventures in Central Asian states. And that is how they moved towards other countries. Primarily, they leaned towards China, and China has started playing a larger role in Central Asian states. So in the coming days and months and years, this region will remain very, very important for India strategically, economically, and politically as well. Because if anything goes wrong in any part of the Central Asia, including Afghanistan, it will have a direct implications for Indian strategy, Indian power, and in India's economic interest. So that is how we have to be very vigilant. India has to be very vigilant while creating stronger ties with the Central Asian states. There are few international organizations like SCO, Shanghai Cooperation, which was started in 2001 by China, dictated by China. Then CSTO, which is a military organization, is largely dictated by Russia. We need to have our own connectivity of Silk Route, which we had earlier, stronger than what China is moving today. So these are the major challenges before us. India has, you might have heard and read that India has huge amount of money and resources in building the Afghanistan. But the current peace process which is going on in Afghanistan is giving a free hand to Taliban, which is anti-secular stand, which has a very anti-secular stand, and which is a very anti-India. In the first phase of Taliban, what did we see? It was a volatile kind of a political structure it tried to create. But this time, when American forces which were located in Afghanistan is going back, some of them are already sent back, India will have a major loss because huge amount of money has been spent to rebuild the social and economic structure of Afghanistan will get a strong hit by Taliban if it comes into power. But international politics, there is always, we need to be very positive. We need to think about the space through which we can create a stronger ties, and that is how the Indian government, current government, is trying to figure out a larger role for its own countries in the Central Asian states, independently, bilaterally, and multilaterally as well, and also wanted to have a very peaceful resolutions and solution of the Afghanistan problem so it does not become a threat to Indian security. Thank you.